What if the sun and the moon, after ages of loneliness, planted a single seed and watched it bloom into five daughters? What if those daughters grew into flower princesses so radiant that even heaven itself could not keep them forever? And what if, beyond the farthest stars, an emperor heard their songs and crossed eternity to find them? Tonight, let us journey into a fairy tale of flowers, stardust, music, and the love that endured beyond the turning of ages. This is the fairy tale for my Mamamoo and Jieun, entitled The Emperor of the Stars and the Five Flower Princesses. If this tale stirred something in you, a memory, a dream, or a truth, our Ko-fi, Amazon, and Patreon links are in the description. Support helps us keep writing for you and the ones you hold dear. In the oldest garden beneath the heavens, where even dawn entered softly as though afraid to disturb the hush, the sun and the moon walked as husband and wife through rows of sleeping lilies, star-white orchids, and silver vines that clung to marble trellises like patient prayers. Their palace was vast enough for choirs, for feast, and for the laughter of daughters, and for the footfall of sons. Yet for ages it had known only two voices, and even those on the certain night seemed too small for the halls built to cradle eternity. Gold light stretched over polished stone. Pale moon milk gathered in the corners of the pathways between them, and silence moved like a third companion. The moon was the first to stop. Her hand hovered above a low basin where still water reflected the sky, and when she looked down, she did not see herself alone. She saw empty places beside her, empty balconies, empty swings in the orchard of clouds, empty cushions by the evening fires where stories should have been told and songs should have been learned in smaller, sweeter voices than their own. We have made the world beautiful, she said at last, her voice gentle enough to soothe tides, but we have never filled our home. The sun did not answer at once. He was the king of regions and the lord of noon, the fire in every ripened field. Yet there were griefs that even he could not burn away. He looked over the garden that they had tended across ages, in every blossom, obedient to season, in every blessing, every fountain singing in silver measure, and he felt more sharply than before that all his brilliance had failed in one quiet and unbearable place. I have lit 10,000 mornings for man below, he murmured. I have warmed kingdoms, fed orchards, gilded rivers, yet when night falls, I return to you and still the halls echo. The moon turned to him then, and the pity in her face was not for weakness but for love. Then let us ask, she whispered, not as rulers and not as old powers of heaven. Let us ask those who have longed too long. And from within her eye sleeve, she drew a single seed wrapped in white silk. It was small, almost impossibly so, and rested in her palm like a secret the world had not yet earned. The sun stared with it with a reverence that he gave to only a few things. Where did you find it? He asked the moon. In the hush between prayers, she said, the faintest smile, perhaps it found me. Together they knelt in the richest part of the celestial earth, where starlight had fallen for centuries and made the soul dark and luminous at once. The sun pressed his warm hand to the ground, and the frost of midnight fled. The moon unwrapped the silk, slow as a mother undressing an infant, and above them the wind stilled and even the fountain seemed to wait. If love has any mercy left for us, the sun said quietly, placing the seed into the cradle of earth, then let it bloom. If longing has ever been holy, the moon whispered, covering it with her hands, then let it take shape. They buried the seed together, and for one trembling moment nothing happened. Then the ground breathed. A fragrance rose first, soft and sweet and strange, like spring remembering a song older than the stars. The silver vines quivered, light gathered long among the roots. Golden pearl folding into one after the other in the garden, and the old witnesses to their solitude seemed to exhale after ages and ages of keeping still. The moon's fingers tightened around the sun's. He did not make a move. Neither of them dared. Somewhere beyond the farthest heaven, where constellations kept their ancient roads, a wind began to travel with music hidden in it, faint as prophecy, tender as promise. The moon heard it first and lifted her face, and the sun heard it next and frowned, not in anger but in awe, as though another brightness had stared in the dark where no rival should have been. "What is that?" he asked. She listened, her eyes shining. "Not for tonight," she said, "but one day I think it will come for them." And beneath their joined hands, the buried seed of longing warmed the earth, and at last began to dream of daughters. Time did not pass in the garden the way it did for worlds below. It gathered instead, like light folding into itself, like a melody, repeating until the memory of the five flowers did not remain flowers for long. The garden did not bloom at all. It did not bloom all at once. It unfolded like a held breath learning how to become a voice. For days could have been centuries and nights that felt like whispered prayers. The soil glowed faintly beneath the hands of the sun and the moon. They did not leave it unattended. Even when the heavens called them to their duties, one would linger, watching and listening, as though something beneath the earth might speak if it only were to left it alone. The moon would return first at dusk, her first steps quiet and her fingers brushing over the silk-trapped memory now hidden beneath the darkened loom. She spoke to it sometimes softly, as if to a child not yet born. "If you hear me," she would murmur, "come gently. The world can be bright, but you will not face it alone." The sun came at dawn, kneeling where her footprints still lingered, placing his warmth to the soil with a care no mortal had ever seen from him. His voice when he spoke was steadier, but not with tremor. "Grow strong," he would say. "Whatever you are and whatever you become, I will be here." Between them, the earth listened, and then one morning, before even the first chorus of light had fully awakened the sky, the garden answered. It began with a crack so soft it might have been mistaken for a dew breaking against a petal. Then another, then five. The ground stirred, and from a place where the seed had been buried, five slender stems rose, each carrying a bud unlike any flower the heavens had ever known. They were not merely colored, they seemed to hold moods within them, small worlds folded in silk. And the first bud glowed with the quiet warmth of dawn, its petals kissed in soft gold, as though the morning itself had chosen it as a mirror. When it opened, the air grew still, reverent, as if the day had paused to witness its own beginning. The moon grew closer, her breath caught between joy and disbelief. "Yong," she whispered, though she did not yet know why the name felt right. "You carry the morning in you." The second bloomed beneath the gathering hush of starlight, its petals deep and luminous, as though night had learned how to hold its own beauty without fear. Tiny sparks of silver drifted from it, dissolving into the air like laughter swallowed too soon. The sun chuckled then, the sound rare and bright. Byul, he said, with a fondness that surprised even him, a star that chose to stay. The third came with wind, not harsh, not wild but alive, a gentle rush that danced through the garden, steering vines and lifting petals and brushing against skin like a promise of a movement yet to come. When it opened, its colors were vivid, restless, impossible to ignore. The moon smiled, her eyes soft with recognition. Hyejin, she breathed, you will not stand still, will you? The fort unfolded in quiet. No wind, no shimmer, only a deep, steady calm that settled over the garden like an embrace. Its petals were pale, thoughtful, holding light the way water holds a reflection. The sun leaned closer, his voice lowered as though afraid to disturb it. Jieun, she murmured, you listen even before the world speaks. And then the fifth bloomed as though it were remembering a song. A faint hush fell over the garden, softer than silence and sweeter than sleep. The air seemed to hum, barely audible, like a melody half forgotten yet deeply known. Its petals trembled as they opened, not from weakness but from feeling and from something too gentle to contain. The moon reached for it instinctively, her fingers trembling. Wheein, she said, and the name lingered like a note just held a heartbeat longer than expected. 5 flowers and 5 daughters. The garden, once quiet, now breathed differently. The sun stood there unmoving, his gaze moving from one bloom to the next, as if trying to understand how something so small had filled a space so vast within him. He laughed then, not as a king, not as a force of nature, but as something simpler, something human in its wonder. We asked for life, he said softly, and now we are given a chorus. The moon did not answer. She could not, for her eyes were already shining with tears she did not hide, and her hand resting gently over the soil where the seed had once slept. For a fleeting moment, the world felt complete, but far beyond the edges of their garden, past the reach of sunlight and the tender dominion of the moon, the wind stirred again, faint and distant, carrying something that was not yet meant for them. It was a melody, unfamiliar yet inevitable. And though the daughters had only opened their eyes to the world, something within them, quiet as breath and deep as roots, learned ever so slightly toward the sound. They became laughter first, small at the beginning and uncertain, like chimes touched by hesitant wind. Their voices learned the shape of joy in spaces between sunlight and moonrise. Yong was the first to step beyond the place where she had bloomed, her feet brushing against the earth with a quiet certainty, as if she already knew the rhythm of morning. She would stand at the edge of dawn with the sun, watching light spill across the heavens, her fingers curled into his sleeve. Why does it always begin again? She once asked, her voice soft with wonder. So that nothing beautiful is ever truly lost, he replied, though the answer felt larger than he could fully hold. Byul did not stay still long enough to ask such questions. She chased the reflections, caught the falling sparks of starlight in her hands, and laughed when they slipped through her fingers like secrets unwilling to be kept. At night, she would sit beside the moon, her head tilted upward. Do the stars ever fall? She asked once. They do, the moon said gently, but only when they wish to become something else. Byul smiled at this, as though she understood something not yet spoken. Hyejin moved like the wind that welcomed her into the world, restless, bright, and always reaching beyond the next horizon. She would run through the long corridors of the palace and her laughter trailing behind her like a banner, her hands brushing against the walls that had once known only silence. And when she paused, it was only to look outward, to where the sky seemed to stretch endlessly. "There's more than this," she said one afternoon, her voice alive with longing. "There has to be." But Jieun listened. Even as a child, she carried quiet, like a companion rather than the absence. She would sit by the still pools of the garden, watching the reflection ripple when no wind touched them, as if the water remembered something the world had forgotten. And when the others spoke, she heard more than their words. And when the sun answered, she listened for what he left unsaid. And Wheein sang before she ever realized she was singing. It began to hum, soft and wandering, like a thought that had not yet chosen a language. It would drift toward the garden at dusk, weaving itself between the branches and petals, settling into the spaces where silence used to live. The moon would pause when she heard it, her eyes closing for just a moment, as though the sound was something she had once known but could not quite recall. "Where did you learn that?" she asked gently one evening. Wheein blinked, surprised. "I don't know," she said. "It just feels like it was always there." The garden changed with them. And then, where once there had no, or there were always had been stillness, there was now movement. Where silence had lingered, there were songs, incomplete, unfinished, but alive. And the son found himself laughing more often, though sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, he would grow quiet again, his gaze resting on them with something deeper than pride. The moon saw it. "They are growing," she said one night as they stood together beneath a sky that is scattered with quiet stars. "I know," he answered. "You cannot keep them as they are." "I am not trying to keep them," he said, though the words did not settle easily within him. But even as he spoke, he watched Yong standing at the edge of dawn, Byul tracing constellations with her fingers, Hyejin leaning toward the horizons she had not yet crossed, Jieun listening to silences that felt heavier now, and Wheein humming a melody that seemed to wander farther each night. Something was changing, not suddenly, not violently, but inevitably. It began in small ways, a pause beyond the answering, a glance held too long toward a distance, a question that did not find its way into words, and always beneath it all the wind returned, faint and unseen, carrying that same distant melody, but clearer now, though still beyond reach. It would brush past them at twilight, sleeping through the garden, though searching for something it had not yet found. The sisters would fall quiet when it came, each feeling differently, Yong with a quiet recognition, Byul with wonder, Hyejin with the restless curiosity, Jieun with a deep inward pull, and Wheein would hum back, not loudly, not deliberately, but as if answering something she had always been meant to hear. One evening, as the sky shifted from gold to silver, Hyejin broke the silence. "Do you hear it too?" she asked, her voice lower than usual, almost hesitant. Yong nodded. "It feels like a song that hasn't finished yet." Byul smiled, though there was something softer in it now. She said, and thought that maybe it's waiting. "For what?" Hyejin pressed. No one answered, not even Jieun, and the son, standing just beyond them, heard everything. His hands folded behind his back, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the light turned into something he could not command. The wind brushed past him, then carrying that same distant melody, and for the first time, it did not feel like something beneath his notice. It felt like something approaching. The wind stepped beside him, her voice gentle. You hear it now. I do, he said. And the moon asked him again. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched the girls and his daughters. No longer flowers, no longer children, but something in between, something becoming, and felt for the first time a quiet and unfamiliar unease settle into the spaces love had once filled without question. It is not of this garden, he said at last. No, the moon agreed softly, but it may one day belong to them, and the wind passed again, a little stronger this time, carrying with it the faintest echo of a voice not yet seen. And though the night held, and the palace still stood untouched, the daughters remained beneath his care. Something beyond the sun had begun to sing. They did not become women all at once. They unfolded into it the way their first petals had opened, each in her own rhythm, each answering something unseen. The garden began to feel smaller, though it had not changed. Yong noticed it first, not with complaint but with quiet awareness. Still walked beside the sun at dawn, and their fingers brushing against his sleeve as they watched the world awakened. Yet now there were moments when her gaze lingered beyond the horizon, as if the morning she carried within her was searching for another sky to rise in. Father, she asked once, her voice steady but soft. Does light belong to where it begins or where it travels? The sun did not answer immediately. He watched the gold spill across distant lands, across oceans and mountains. He warmed for ages and still felt the question settle deeper than it should have. Light belongs to where it is needed, he said at last. Yong nodded, though something in her expression suggested the answer had not fully reached her. Byul's laughter remained bright, but it carried a new edge now. Not sharp, not sorrowful, but aware. She still chased starlight, still gathered fragments of the night as though they were treasures meant only for her. Yet sometimes she would stop mid-motion, her hand hovering in the air, her eyes fixed on a constellation she had never noticed before. They moved, she said one evening, her voice hushed. They always have, the moon replied. No, Byul shook her head, smiling faintly. Not like this. It's like they're waiting. For what, the moon questioned her. Byul did not answer. Instead, she reached upward as though the sky might lower itself just enough for her to understand. Hyejin grew restless. The corridors she once raced through no longer satisfied her. The gardens, though still beautiful, began to feel like a story she had already memorized. She would stand at the highest balconies, her hair lifted by unseen winds and her eyes fixed on distances no one else seemed to notice. There's something out there, she insisted more than once. Not just worlds, not just people. Something that moves like it's coming closer. Not everything that approaches is meant to be welcomed, the sun said, his voice firmer now. Hyejin turned to him, her gaze unwavering. And not everything worth loving waits for permission. The words lingered longer than either of them had expected. Jieun said little, but she felt more than the others had realized. The steel pools she once watched had changed. Their reflections no longer held only by the garden and the sky above. Sometimes faintly, there were shapes she could not name, ripples that did not belong to the wind or to the touch. She placed her hand against the water one night, her voice barely above a whisper. Who are you? The surface trembled, not in answer but in recognition. In Wheein songs grew. What had once been a hum became a melody. What had once been instinct became expression. Her voice, soft as ever, now carried something deeper. A longing she could not explain, a familiarity with something she had never met. The garden listened when she sang. The moon closed her eyes, and even the sun, though he would not admit it, found himself pausing at the edges of her voice. But it was not only her singing that had changed, it was the way the wind answered. At dusk, when her melodies drifted into spaces between branches and light, the air would stir and return, carrying back fragments, not her own, not loud, not clear, but there, woven into her notes like an echo that had traveled too far to remain whole. One evening, as the five sisters sat together beneath the sky, between gold and silver, Wheein fell silent mid-song. "You hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Yong nodded slowly. "It's closer now." Byul leaned forward, her eyes bright. "It's like someone singing back." Hyejin stood, her pulse quickening. "Then let's find it." "No," Yong said gently, though her own voice carried uncertainty. "We don't know what it is." "Does that matter?" Hyejin pressed. "We've never known anything until we stepped toward it." Jieun looked at Wheein and then, her expression thoughtful. "What did it feel like?" Wheein hesitated. "Like I wasn't alone," she admitted. The word settled into the space between them, quiet and undeniable. And beyond them, unseen but not unfelt, the sun listened. His hands were clasped behind his back again, his posture unchanged, but something within him had shifted. The garden no longer felt entirely under his dominion. There were movements now he could not command, and sounds he could not silence, and questions he could not answer. "They are changing," he said later, his voice low as he stood beside the moon. "They are becoming," she corrected gently. "And what if that calls to them takes them away?" The moon did not respond immediately. She looked instead of their daughters, no longer children, no longer flowers, but something luminous in between. Something is reaching. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "it's not like taking them away, but leading them forward." The sun's gaze hardened, though not with anger. "With my blessing," he said, as though the words themselves were law, or not at all. The wind passed through the garden again. It was stronger now, carrying with it a melody that no longer felt distant. It brushed against Yong like a memory. It danced around Byul like a promise. It stirred Hyejin like a challenge. And it settled into Jieun like a truth waiting to be spoken. And when it reached Wheein, she did not hesitate this time, and she sang. And somewhere beyond the reach of even the sun's light, and beyond the last quiet border of the known heavens, the song answered. The answer did not arrive with thunder. It came like a second breath, woven into the mist. When Wheein's voice slipped into the evening air, soft and unguarded, the garden did not simply listen. It changed. The wind that had once passed like a wandering thought now turned, curved, returned, carrying with it something whole, not an echo, not a fragment, but a voice, not loud, not overwhelming, but certain. It did not interrupt her song. It found it, slept beneath it, rose beside it, as though it had always known where her melody would fall, and been waiting for the exact moment to meet it there. Wheein froze, her lips parted, but no sound came. The others felt it at once. Yong stepped forward slowly, her breath unsteady, her hand instinctively reaching for something she could not yet name. "It's him," she whispered, though she had never really seen him, never spoken to him, yet the knowing settled into the hairs like dawn into the sky. And then Byul laughed, not with playfulness, but with wonder so bright it trembled. "He found us," she said, her voice almost disbelieving. "He actually found us." Hyejin did not speak. She moved, her body already leaning toward the edge of the garden, toward the horizon. that had called her for so long, and their pulse quickened, not with fear but with recognition, as though the distance had closed, and that she always wanted it to cross had finally taken a step toward her. Jieun closed her eyes and listened, not to the sound itself, but to what rested beneath it. There was no hunger in it, no demand, only presence, only a quiet certainty that did not need to declare itself to be understood. He isn't talking, she said softly. He's offering. The wind gathered, stronger now but not harsh. It moved through the garden with intention, brushing against petals, steering branches, and lifting strands of hair as though guiding rather than claiming. The melody carried within it deepened, no longer distant, no longer uncertain. It spoke in a language older than speech, one that settled into the heart before the mind could question it. The sun stepped forward. The light around him sharpened, gold turning brighter, edges more refined, as though the sky itself had straightened in his presence. The garden stilled in response, and even the wind hesitated as it reached the boundary of his will. Enough! The word did not echo, it settled. The melody did not vanish, but it softened, as though acknowledging the weight of his voice without retreating from it. You come into my domain, the sun said, his gaze fixed beyond the horizon, beyond what could be seen. You reach for what is mine, and you do so without asking. The wind stirred again, but this time it did not retreat. It answered, not with defiance, not with submission, but with truth. The voice returned, carried on the breath of the unseen, steady and unwavering. I do not take what is yours. The words did not strike the air. They settled like something that had always belonged there. I called to what already hears me, and the daughters felt it. Not as persuasion, not as force, but as a recognition. Yong's hand trembled slightly, her eyes fixed lowered, and her voice barely above a whisper. I've known that voice longer than I've known myself. Byul stepped closer to her laughter softer and deeper. It's like a star you didn't know you were waiting for. Hyejin's breath quickened, her gaze unyielding. Then why should we pretend we don't hear it? The sun's expression hardened, though not in anger, but in something far more fragile. Fear. They do not belong to you, he said. The wind quieted just for a moment, as though the heavens themselves held their breath. Then, they do not belong to me, answered the wind. Silence followed, and real silence, the kind that does not press, does not demand, but waits. The moon stepped forward then, her presence gentle, her voice softer than the space between heartbeats. They were never meant to be kept, she said. The sun did not look at her. His gaze remained fixed ahead, though something within faltered for a moment. It's just a moment. He saw not the emperor beyond the stars, and not the force that had dared to answer him. He saw the garden as it had once been, empty, still, unanswered. His hands loosened behind his back. The wind moved again, softer now, carrying the melody not as a challenge, but as an invitation left open. No demand, no claim, only song. Wheein found her voice again. Not all at once, not boldly, but gently as though stepping into something sacred. She sang, and this time she did not stop when the answer came. The voices met, intertwined, not one overtaking the other, but both welcoming something more than they had been alone. Yong closed her eyes, the sound settling into her like sunlight finding its place. Byul smiled, her fingers curling as though holding something invisible yet real. Hyejin took another step forward, closer to the edge, her heart no longer restless, but certain, and Jieun listened, not for what was said, but for what it meant. And far beyond them, unseen and undeniable, the Emperor of the Stars did not arrive with light alone. He arrived with the song that had already reached them, and for a long moment no one answered. The wind still carried the last echoes of his song through the garden, treading between silver branches and moonlight blossoms. Petals drifted through the air like slow falling stars, and the daughter stood suspended between wonder and breath. The sun regarded the newcomer in silence. His golden gaze, which had watched kingdoms rise in the seas, reshaped the coastline, settled upon the emperor of the stars. He expected pride, he expected defiance, he expected the arrogance that had often followed power. Instead, just lowered his head, then he knelt. The daughters cast softly. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. The Emperor of the Stars, whose road stretched beyond the last constellations, whose voice had crossed the breadth of creation itself, placed one knee upon the earth of the celestial garden and bowed before the sun. The gesture was not weakness, it was respect. The sun's brow furrowed. "You kneel?" Jess remained where he was, his head lowered. "I do." "You stand among stars beyond counting." "I do." "You command the realms beyond my sight." "I do." And the sun's voice deepened. "Then why kneel before me?" For the first time, Jess lifted his eyes, because within them was neither challenge nor submission but understanding. "Because before I was emperor, I was a subject beneath your light." Silence settled once more. "The first harvest of my people grew beneath your warmth. The first rivers that watered our fields reflected your dawn. The first children who had dreamed beneath the heavens slept beneath your sky." He placed a hand over his heart. "No king stands alone." The moon watched quietly. The daughters listened and just continued. "You gave warmth to words that would never know your name. You watched over countless lives that would never thank you if you shine now. And if I shine now, then part of that light was first borrowed from yours." Something shifted in the sun's expression. Not surrender, not yet, but surprise. The kind that comes when pride expects arrival and finds gratitude instead. Jess rose slowly. Then from within the folds of his star-woven robes, he drew forth a small crystal vessel. Inside swirled a silver gold dust unlike anything the garden had ever seen. The particles glimmered like tiny galaxies, like dreams given shape. The moon stepped forward. "What is it, my king?" Stardust just replied. Just opened the vessel. Immediately the wind carried thousands of radiant motes into the air. The celestial garden filled with silver light, and the dust drifted upward, then outward, flowing beyond the palace, beyond the heavens, and beyond even the clouds below. The daughters watched as rivers of stardust descended toward the distant world beneath them and toward earth. Then the dust settled into valleys, into mountains, into forests, into fertile fields, into the dark soil waiting beneath future generations. Wherever it landed, the earth shimmered. The soil seemed richer and deeper and more alive. "What have you done?" asked the sun. Jess smiled. "I have given them dreams." The Golden King stared. Far below, humanity's future waited unseen. Farmers not yet born, poets whose songs had not been written, painters who'd one day imagine impossible beauty, and lovers who would whisper names into moonlit nights. Children who would look toward the stars and wonder what waited beyond them. "The soil will remember," Jess said softly. "The stardust will remain hidden within it. Crops will grow and forests will flourish. But more than that," his gaze toward the distant world, "it will help them dream." The sun's daughter smiled. For Yong, it felt like hope. For Byul, wonder. For Hyejin, possibility. For Jieun, meaning. And for Wheein, a song not yet sung. And the sun, watching the silver gold dust spread across the sleeping world, realized something profound. This man had crossed eternity not to take. He had come bearing gifts, not for himself, not even for the flower daughters he loved, but for the countless strangers he would never meet. The sun looked upon the Emperor of the Stars once more, and for the first time the unease within his heart had begun to soften. And perhaps, he thought, a man willing to kneel before the light that raised him and gave away pieces of his own stars so that others might dream, was not a threat to his daughters at all. Perhaps it was the answer to a prayer planted long ago in a garden beneath the heavens. He did not descend like a conqueror. He arrived the way music arrives, already inside the moment before anyone realizes it has begun. The wind curved inward, not rushing now but circling, folding the garden into a quiet, luminous center. The light shifted, not brighter than the sun, not softer than the moon, but something between, something that felt like distance made gentle, like eternity learning how to take a single step closer. And then he was there. Not in full blaze, not overwhelming but present, the Emperor of the Stars standing where the wind had gathered, his form outlined in constellations that moved like breath across his shoulders. His gaze did not rise to challenge the sun. It did not bow either. It rested first on them, on the five daughters who had already heard him long before they had seen him. For a moment no one spoke, then the petals answered. It began beneath their feet. The garden stirred, the flowers trembling, opening, rising as though recognizing something older than themselves. Petals loosened from their stems, lifting into the air, not failing or falling, but floating, drawn into a slow circling dance, gold, silver, and soft hues of dawn and twilight. They moved like the memory given form. Jess stepped forward, not toward the sun, toward the daughters. And when he lifted his hand, it was not to claim, not to demand, or to command, but to invite. The wind softened. He did not sing loudly. His voice moved like a murmur that carried close to the heart, threading itself through the air the way starlight threads through darkness, quiet but impossible to ignore. He sang and said that I called your names where no voice could follow, held them like embers beneath my breath. Though the sky stretched between us in endless silence, still I found you, even in dreams I could not keep. The petals swirled closer, brushing against Yong first. She stepped forward without thinking, her movements gentle, almost reverent, as though she had known this dance long before her feet touched the ground and her fingers met his. And the moment they did, the air warmed, not with fire, but with recognition. The days I never lived beside you still found their way into my heart. His voice continued softly, shifting as though it had always belonged beside hers. Byul laughed then, not in surprise but in joy, and stepped into the circle. Her movements bright, her presence turning and drifting into petals like sparks of light. They followed her laughter, rising and scattering, reforming like constellations written in motion. Hyejin did not wait. She moved with him, not behind, not hesitant, but beside, her steps quick and alive, her gaze steady as though she had already crossed the distance he had traveled. The wind lifted around her, carrying the rhythm, turning the dance into something fierce and free. Jieun followed quietly. Her hand brushed against his sleeve, her presence grounding in the movement, her steps measured, listening even as she moved. The petals slowed around her, circling in a gentler rhythm, as though the dance itself had learned to breathe. And then Wheein did not step, she sang. Her voice rose soft as first, then stronger, weaving into his, not echoing, not following but answering. The moonlight holds what I could not say, the nights remember what I could not reach. Even now, across the silent sky, your warmth remains with my hands, and their voices met, not as one overtaking the other, but as something completing itself. The petals bloomed mid-air, opening as they turned, each one catching the light, reflecting moments not yet lived but already felt, laughter, longing, hands that would one day not hesitate. Around them the garden transformed, not into something new, but into what it had always had been waiting to become. And though the sun still stood, and though the moon still watched, and though the heavens held their breath, between what was and what would be, the dance did not ask for permission, but simply continued. Each day, I write and create for my beloved Yong, the sun who lights up my every verse, every tale, every quiet thought I dare to share. If her warmth reached you through these words, please like, share, and subscribe. Let's keep stories that shine.